How much is Lansdowne 2.0 really going to cost? To tear down that stadium behind me and to build a new one? And also to remove this hill that I'm on and to put in a new event center. An event center that's going to take over much of the green space on site here. What is going to be the price tag for all of this, and how are we going to pay for it? Hi, I'm Neil Saravandamutu. I'm a director with City Shapes. I'm also the author of the 613 on Substack. And I've been spending a lot of time looking at the financials of Lansdowne. And I'm here to tell you exactly how much it's going to cost and how we are going to pay for it over the next 40 years. If you've been paying attention over the last year, you've probably heard the number of $419 million quoted as the cost to renovate Lansdowne, of which taxpayers will only be on the hook for $5 million a year. Now that's the city's line, and it's also the line of the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group, OSEG, the city's partner in this project. Now I'm here to say that those rosy projections are probably not going to pan out. And if you can stick with me for a couple of minutes, I'd like to dig into the numbers and show you exactly how much Lansdowne is going to cost. Now, in 2022, we were told Lansdowne would cost $333 million. In 2023, $419 million. In 2024, the Auditor General upped the cost to $493 million. And these are Class C estimates, to use the industry jargon. Class C is considered a ballpark estimate. So how much will Lansdowne cost in 2025 or in 2026 when we might actually put shovels in the ground? And by the way, there's another $19 million in construction costs for 140 parking spots that we're building here at Lansdowne. Now the question is, why aren't we including those in the project costs? And what the city will say is that we're going to lease those back to a private developer so that the cost to the city will effectively be zero. However, taxpayers will have to pay for it upfront. But this parking construction requires $1 million a year in taxpayer-funded debt, while the city is saying that the market value of leasing those parking spots is only $400,000 a year. So who's making up the $600,000 shortfall? The city says the money will come out of parking reserves, but that's really just taxpayer money that we could spend elsewhere. So to conclude on the cost of Lansdowne, we know that the Auditor General says that it will cost $493 million to build. We know there'll be another $19 million for parking, so that's taking us well over $500 million in total. So the question is, how are we going to finance all of this? So first we're going to pay $81 million up front. Think of this like the down payment on a home, and there are 4 components to that down payment. So number one, $33 million in what the city calls a debenture premium. Does anyone know what this is? The city has never really explained, and in the finance sector we have a bad habit of using complex terminology when we don't really want people digging into what something might actually mean. So in the case of debenture premium, it means that either the city was able to raise more money when it issued the bond for Lansdowne 1.0 than it expected, so that's a good thing, or it was able to refinance that debt at a later date at a lower interest rate, also a good thing. What it did is it resulted in $33 million that we wouldn't have otherwise had. But the real question is, why does that $33 million that we saved on Lansdowne 1.0 automatically go to Lansdowne 2.0? That money could be used for anything. Number two, $18 million from the capital budget. Again, that money could be used for any capital project. Why this one? Add these 2 items and you get $51 million that could be spent effectively on anything in the city. And number 3, $29 million in air rights. The city is selling off rights to one developer to build luxury towers in the middle of Lansdowne Park. Now those luxury towers are going to be about 40 stories tall, which is double the height of the tower behind me. What we do as a city is we auction off the air rights to build these towers. That means that a developer has the right to build in the air above a public property. Those air rights have been auctioned, and the city's reporting that we would generate about $39 million in air rights. Now, $10 million of that money goes straight to affordable housing, so there's $29 million that would be available to be used to spend for Lansdowne. And number 4, $20 million from the province or federal government.
Just a bit of new information that I spoke to the Premier on Monday night and told him about the project and that we would be coming to the province with a proposal if the project is approved. And he indicated he would be happy to receive a proposal from us and would be willing to take a look at how the province could participate in this project.
But let's not kid ourselves. That was over a year ago. The federal and the provincial governments, they're not about to kick up $20 million for a sports stadium. Let's take stock. We have $512 million in total project costs. We have $81 million that we can use for upfront payments. That leaves $432 million that we would need to borrow. Now, using the city's borrowing assumptions, we would have annual payments of $22 million a year over 40 years to repay that debt. The city currently has $16 million that it is setting aside for debt repayments. So how will we pay $22 million a year to cover Lansdowne debt charges? The city and OSEG are projecting revenues out to the year 2066, which we can look at on an annual basis. Those projections show that there will be multiple sources of revenue each year, starting with $500,000 in rent. There will be another $700,000 a year in ticket surcharges and a further $400,000 in parking revenues. That adds up to $1.6 million in what I would consider reliable revenue streams. Now, there's some additional revenue, but these are less reliable. There is $500,000 in hotel tax revenue, despite there currently being no plan to have a hotel on site. There is $6.3 million in Lansdowne partnership profits each year, but as we remember from the original Lansdowne deal, the city may never see any of those promised profits. And there is also $3.4 million a year in property taxes from the new towers that are built on site. Although we don't know when those towers will actually go up and the city will start receiving this money. These three revenue streams add up to $10.2 million a year. However, I would consider these as unreliable revenue. We just don't know if they will materialize or not. In total, we have up to $11.8 million in potential revenue sources, but annual debt service charges of $22 million. That means in the best case scenario, taxpayers will be on the hook for about $10.2 million a year. In the worst case scenario, where some of those unreliable revenue streams do not come through, taxpayers could be on the hook for up to more than $20 million a year. It's important to understand that these are annual averages out to the year 2066. Now, a lot of the profits that come to Lansdowne do so towards the end of that period. So I would like to know what this looks like to taxpayers in the near term, say over the first decade of operation of Lansdowne 2.0, starting in 2030. Let's look again at those revenue streams. In its first decade of operations, Lansdowne 2.0 can count on those reliable sources of revenue of $1.6 million a year. However, the unreliable revenue is more challenging. It's highly optimistic to think that we'll get even half of those hotel accommodation taxes. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that we'll get $200,000 a year. The annual profits to the city in the first decade are only projected to be $3.4 million a year, according to the Lansdowne business plan. And in committee meetings, the Lansdowne proponents have said that the towers might only be built a decade after the stadium renovation. Hopefully we can count the $100,000 in commercial tax uplift in the near term, but the residential tower tax money may not come anytime soon. So we have potential revenues in the first decade that are considerably lower than what is predicted for future decades. This means in 2030 to 2039, taxpayers are on the hook for somewhere between $16.7 and $20.4 million a year. And remember, $20 million is equal to about a 1% property tax increase. Lansdowne will have an immediate impact on taxpayers, and that's what the city is not making clear. My main message is that Lansdowne will probably cost taxpayers about $20 million a year, equivalent to a 1% property tax increase, at least over the first couple of decades. And the other thing to keep in mind is that taxpayers are responsible for any cost overruns. Now, we know that large infrastructure projects have a track record of going over budget or over time. In fact, a recent analysis, How Big Things Get Done, found that 91% of large infrastructure projects either went over budget, over time, or both. So what makes us think that Lansdowne is going to be any different? It shouldn't have to be up to residents to explain the financing of Lansdowne. You hope the city would make that abundantly clear. If you have concerns about the Lansdowne financing, think that maybe there's better ways the city could be spending our tax money, then there's a petition that I think you'll want to sign. It's a petition calling on the City of Ottawa to hold a binding referendum before deciding on whether we spend $500 million to renovate Lansdowne. You can find that petition at betterottawa.ca, and I hope you'll consider signing it. Thanks very much.